It's time to actually deploy our smart contract to the network. We've gotten our client ready to talk to the network. We've gotten our code ready to get uploaded, but we haven't actually uploaded it yet. We'll do that in this video, and then we'll test the smart contract after instantiating it and make sure it works as we expect. Now, if you're expecting an Osmosis video and you're getting a Neutron one, I just haven't been able to get test Osmo yet, but everything should map over. Just use Osmosis D instead of Neutron D. I'll get an Osmosis specific video up as soon as I can. Go back to your terminal. Now, it can be in your project file in cursor or code or whatever your IDE is. I'm just going to, for clarity, use it here in my terminal window. Your config should be already set as the config video indicated with a testnet RPC, Pi-on1, or if you're on Osmosis, Osmo-test-5, and then using our test keyring backend. We may have to deal with the fact that we don't have any gas prices set here as we encounter those problems. The compilation process, when we compiled our smart contract, gave us a WASM file named counter.wasm. So I'm going to go into the learn directory, and in artifacts, we have that counter WASM file. So if I go in there, I can see it right here. And this is what I want to store on chain as WASM code. I'll get a code ID back, and then I can create the actual contract with its instantiate variables or its instantiate settings, which you can see in message. Right now on my contract, it just means I need to provide a count when I instantiate. You may have something different depending on the extensions you made as you extended this contract. But I just need to provide that and the code ID, and I'll end up with a smart contract deployed. So first, Neutron D, TX, and it's a WASM transaction as opposed to like a bank transaction and these other kinds of modules we could have, but we have a WASM transaction that we're activating because all of the things related to smart contracts are in the WASM subcategory. So I Neutron D, TX, WASM, and the options available here are store, which we have to do first to upload a binary, and then instantiate, or instantiate to, and the other ones we'll deal with as we're testing and working with our smart contract. So Neutron D, TX, WASM, store, and then what the actual code is, it's counter.wasm in our case. Then I have to say who's storing it. And if you remember, I have a testnet counter account locally, a testnet counter key, and that's going to be the party that is storing. My chain ID is already set. Let's go ahead and also set the gas prices here. Now you can set this in the config as I showed you, but otherwise you'll get some kind of error related to fees. I'll set it to 0.1 Neutron on testnet. It doesn't matter too much. This actually has to be together like this. And then also set the gas to be auto. And then there's this gas adjustment feature, which you can tweak if you aren't getting transactions through. I'm going to start with 1.3 if we have a problem. Then I'll increase it. And then you set your broadcast mode, like either B or like this, to block. And what that means is rather than just sending the transaction off and not really waiting for a response, just getting a hash, it'll wait and the transaction will go through and then we'll get the full response without having to go look up the transaction hash later. And then I'll just say yes to everything that it's going to ask me. All right, and Neutron doesn't support the return type block, so we'll just go ahead with sync. Since it's sync, we didn't get any information back except this TX hash. Some setups will let you do block like I tried, some maybe won't. So in that case, you have to look up the transaction and see what actually happened here. Because we got the response, we got the hash, we got like an acceptance from the node that the transaction to store the code was pushed, but we don't know what happened when it hit consensus. So let's go Neutron D and query this particular transaction. All right, I'm gonna try that again because I got a timeout. Connection refused. Let me go to mint scan and see if this transaction was submitted at all. Oh, no internet. Well, that'll explain it. All right, so I guess I flipped to the wrong Wi-Fi during that process. I want to see if the transaction was actually pushed at all. It was. Okay, so there was a successful testnet transaction with this hash that was pushed. It's called store code. And the code ID is 7672. That's what we'll have to know. And here is the byte code of the contract. This is a base 64 representation of our WASM file. So I can now come over, since I have internet now, and query the transaction. with Neutron D, not Neutron. Oh my gosh, not Neutron N or P, whatever that was. And I get the same details here. Now there's this whopping WASM set here, but you'll see I do get the code ID somewhere in this response. So it's just up here somewhere. There it is. Code ID 7672. So I can either go to mint scan with this TXID or find the code ID somewhere in the response. Just look for the key code ID. You can use find and find 7672. So now I know that code ID. That code ID is on chain and it's the code of my smart contract. So now in order to actually create a smart contract, I need to reference that code. You don't put code out for every smart contract. Smart contract references code. That way you can have multiple contracts that use the same code without having to repeatedly upload it. So to instantiate the smart contract, I will have to pass in the initial variables. You'll remember that count is my initial instantiate message. I provide a count with a number. And it's a little awkward to inline these things in a command. What if I need to make some updates and so on? I want to use the command history with a different initial state. So it's usually better to export or do whatever you need to do to set an environment variable in your local environment. I'm going to set count to 420. And now you'll see that I have this environment variable. I'm on Mac and it's similar to set it on any platform. I get this variable. Now this is my JSON representation of this instantiate message. And that's what I'll need to pass in to instantiate. So I've made it a little bit easier for myself. I call, Neutron D, TX WASM instantiate this time. And I need the code ID, which is 7672. Verify that, yep. And I need the actual, let's take a look at the help file here so you can see the arguments here. It's Neutron DTX WASM instantiate, the code ID, and then the arguments. And then we need a label, and we can optionally have a contract admin. And then we have any other flags, which I will need a from flag, for example, and so on. And here's a full example, where in this case, foo bar is the instantiate message. In our case, it's count 420. They actually use a script for the admin key here, which I will happily use. So let's copy this out for ourselves. Neutron D, TX WASM instantiate. Code is 7672. We have this initial state variable that can stand in for our init, and then admin equals, I'm gonna use the script here. You could look this up, but you can run a command in here, keys show, we called it testnet counter A. So the same account that we funded that uploaded the code will be the admin of this smart contract. Then it needs to be from the same actor, the testnet counter. We'll label it learn XYZ counter. All right, so we come up with this message ready to sign. I didn't add a -y here, so it is going to ask me to confirm the transaction. No fee coin provided. All right, this is where we get back to where I had to add all those fee tags. And I'm just going to config my Neutron really quick so that I have the gas set to auto, the gas adjustment set to 1.3, and the gas prices set to 0.1 U Neutron. And then when I push through this message, it'll just use my auto config gas prices. We shouldn't have a problem. Failed to execute message. Unknown request. All right then. Okay, that wasn't a particularly helpful error message up here, this failed to execute message. But it did help us. When I gave it the initial state here, it said error parsing into a type, and it gave me the type it has an error parsing into. Counter message instantiate message. So it couldn't take this initial state that I had and parse it into this format. It had a problem with that. And you should see why. If I look at initial state, you see that I have 420 in quotes. So what I did here is I'm so used to passing in amounts as strings, because when you have big amounts like coin amounts and so on, the serializer deserializer doesn't like big numbers. So in CosmWasm, we pass those in as strings, and they become the big numbers on the once they're deserialized. But here, my 420 isn't actually using one of those types. It's just using I32, a smaller native type. So it expected a number here, not in quotation marks. This error message told me there was an error parsing into counter message instantiate message. So I immediately knew that I needed to adjust that and use this instead, where the count was 420, a number rather than a string. And then we went through, we got our TX hash here, and I can further investigate the TX hash in order to get the contract address. Query TX. All right. Here's our admin. Here's our code ID. Okay, our contract address is this longer format address, and I'm going to go ahead and save that. Export learn counter contract. All right, now whenever I use this sort of also unwieldy, but at least easier to remember value, I will get this. Now I can query this contract and make sure it's in fact the one I expect it to be.